aceasta.
With us is Andrei Codrescu, Romanian poet, essayist, author, and regular commentator on NPR's All Things Considered. Codrescu was born and raised in Transylvania, Romania, and was expelled from the University of Bucharest in 1965 during the repressive regime of Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator who was killed by the people during the upheaval in Romania last year. He's lived in the United States since. Currently, he's the editor of a journal called The Exquisite Corpse, and he teaches at Louisiana State University. Joining Mr. Codrescu is the internationally known columnist for The Nation, Washington editor for Harper's, and book reviewer for Newsday, Christopher Hitchens.
Freedom or death. The qualities of human survival that are needful in a country that's known every variety of despotism, every variety that's been road tested within living memory, are these: the ironic, the skeptical, the raucously incredulous, the openness to the fantastic. And my new friend Andrei is a fine exemplar of these qualities, as you'll shortly hear and shortly see. Romania Libera, it's sad to say, is still a country of the imagination. But sad as it is to think of Romania Libera, free Romania, as still a country of the imagination, we can console ourselves with the thought that in countries of the imagination, people like Andrei can be part of the provisional government, even if they're always teetering on the verge of resignation. So, forward, Andrei, please. May we close the curtains. And, ladies and gentlemen, I wish I was in your shoes and was meeting him for the first time. Thank you.
Well, our first poet was an exile, so ever since, in a kind of reciprocal gesture, Romania has been sending all their poets out. It's our main export. Of course, for years I just thought of myself as American, until this Romania burst into my consciousness and everyone else's. And so now I'm Romanian once more. My horrible stepfather, who was an engineer and whose only pleasure in life was building amateur radios, used to spend every weekend at his workshop table inventing. He invented a phone radio, a clock radio, a butter churn radio, and a mailbox radio, long before these things became common. So proud was he of his radios that he punished anyone who didn't show the proper degree of amazement before them. Once he beat me for writing dirty words on the world map that hung over his workshop table. He didn't beat me because the words were dirty, but because dirty words distracted him from his radios. One day I removed a small piece from inside his latest creation. It took him several cursing days to find out what was wrong. From that time on, I took a little piece out of whatever he was working on every time I chanced by his table. He became horribly moody and had big fights with my mother. He beat me whenever he could lay his hands on me, which wasn't often. I was too quick and he was too depressed. Finally, one day he packed his radios and his bags and he left us. My mother cried, but it was a great day for me. And now that I have become a little piece in the radio myself, I often wonder if I am not the very first piece that I removed from my horrible stepfather's radio. And whenever somebody says, I heard one of your radio pieces, a piece of radio comes back to me, removed by little fingers from a mean man's sole pleasure in life.
When you went back to visit your native country, and I know that you've been an American for many years and you consider yourself an American, how did you respond to what was going on there?
Well, the first time I felt the euphoria that everyone else was feeling there about the end of the Ceausescu's, and I felt emotions that haven't been repeated since, particularly since I've gone back the second time in July, and both the atmosphere and the country seemed quite different to me, and the euphoria had turned to anger. I think what's happened there recently, though, was probably the greatest staged play of the end of this century, and they are descendants of the Romans for a good reason. It was a play with real bodies, that it was done on a scale that I don't think it's been seen anywhere else, and quite scripted.
Now, among the many great Romanian names of the century is that of Ionescu. And did you, if you had to say which play you were in from Ionescu, which scenario would you like to compare it with?
Well, you know, I've thought about this for a while, and I think that it is part of the rhinoceros, the parts of the rhino were in this play. There are also parts of others, including the bald soprano, but it has other more tragic levels that I think that UNESCO didn't quite get to. So I would say that the Romanian Revolution was scripted by UNESCO, but also by Beckett in some ways. Of course, the reason I had a stepfather at all is because my real father, Stalin, died when I was a child, and it was a traumatic event in my life, as it was in the life of many other people of my generation born in that part of the world. And it's the question that one asks, the way people ask in the United States, where were you when John Kennedy was shot? People say, where were you when Stalin died? Nobody dies like Stalin did. He didn't just die, he took the world with him. My world, at any rate. I was 8 years old. At school, all the kids had been crying, and I'd been crying the most. For us, Stalin was that saintly, fatherly figure that smiled from above, surrounded by adoring children. For me personally, he was father, pure and simple, because I didn't have one of my own. On my little nightstand table, I had his portrait, and I slept securely under the shadow of his mustache. Devastated, disbelieving, I came home from school to the back alleys, hiding my tears from everyone. When I got home, I saw my stepfather and another man sitting soberly at the kitchen table. I slipped into the room and hid, too upset to talk. I'm glad the son of a bitch is dead, the man said, and my stepfather concurred. My world was there and then shattered forever. Later, I watched people cry and tear their hair publicly on the streets, but I somehow knew that it was all a show. They were just using the occasion to grieve, weep, and cry for other sorrows. Stalin was just an excuse to mourn for the world. And I suspected fraud about the whole race of fathers, leaders, and men larger than life. There are no fathers, I decided, only mustaches which scatter in the wind, hair by hair, which vanish, disappear, betray, and leave you alone at night. I met a task correspondent in Sibiu, in my hometown. We got drunk, we had a bottle of vodka, and he said, I was in Timișoara.
Did you get drunk on one bottle of vodka?
Well, the two of us did okay, because the local brew was serving as a background for this.
Right.
Because we drank quite a bit of Tsuika and some wine, too.
He was new to task, presumably.
I think that's all he had. Maybe he kept his stash for someone else, but it was enough. One of the things he said was that in Timișoara on the 10th of December, and I said, Timișoara on the 10th of December, what are you doing in Timișoara on the 10th of December? None of this business happened until the 15th. And then he winked. I said, no, wait a minute. I said, what were you doing in Timișoara on the 10th of December? He said, well, I was there. I said, how many of you were there? He said, there were 3 task correspondents. There was someone from Hungarian radio and 2 people from Tanjug. I said, you're all in Timișoara on the 10th in this little Transylvanian town over here? So yes, Romania now is a country where a great fiction is going on, and it's true that a fiction can be, and the imagination can be a powerful and wonderful thing. The kind of fiction that now exists in that country is not a good one. It's an evil one in many ways. Mainly that the government now ruling the country has been, is the result of a great staged play. More Romanian than that is the fact that the Brancusi, actually is how Romanians say it, but Brancusi's sculptures, especially the magic bird, which I had the sort of unique and rare privilege of viewing all by myself today somewhere in the recesses of this museum. It figures in the poetry of a great Romanian poet named Lucian Blaga, and I translated his poems into English, not because I believe in translation, because I don't, but because I had to pay a debt. He was the poet of my adolescence. He's the poet forbidden when I was growing up, who turned all of us into poets, the ones of us who were going to do that. And the way I obtained his book is by stealing it from a very nice old man who invited a few of us young poets to his house to eat his food. And so we repaid him by stealing all his books. So I stole the first volume of Blaga's poetry, and then not only that, but I miserably went ahead immediately, because I needed some money to drink and be a young poet, and sold it to Mihai Nadin, a professor then in Cluj, and told him that I would give him volume 2 and 3 whenever I would get a chance to steal those. And he paid me for the whole thing, so years pass, and I'm now in America, and I was at the Donnell Library in New York, the Romanian library there, and there was a volume of Blaga in Romanian, and I stole that. So it became imperative to translate this poet for all those reasons, and because I loved him. But then I did dedicate this to Professor Nadin, who is now in the United States, and said, here is volume 2 and 3, okay? It's a sordid story. The magic bird. High-signed Orion blesses you in the sudden wind. A tear shedding above you its high and holy geometry. You lived once on a sea bottom and circled closely the solar fire. Your cries sounded from floating forests over the first waters. Are you a bird, a traveling bell, or a creature, an earless jug, perhaps? A golden song spinning above our fear of dead riddles. Living in the dark of tales, you play ghostly reed pipes to those who drink sleep from black subterranean puppies. The light in your green eyes is phosphorus peeled from old bones. Listening to wordless revelation, you are lost in flight in celestial grass. You guess profound mysteries under the hewn domes of your afternoons. Soar on endlessly, but do not reveal to us what you see. This business in the end about do not reveal to us what you see is a central fact of Blaga's poetry, who once said that our job when faced by a mystery is not to explain it, but to increase its mysteriousness.
When I was trudging around Transylvania and talking to Romanians and so on during the revolution, I thought I saw, and I wrote in the article in Granta that I did about it, I thought I saw the shadow of an impending military regime, not a junta, not a cabinet of generals, but a state where really the armed forces would hold the most power. Was I wrong in thinking that? People.
Well, what we are seeing now is the emergence of a new type of military dictatorship in that part of the world. A new kind of military, because traditionally the military was never involved, but now they're running the country. They have an image problem. They can be seen as running the country, but there will come a point very soon, probably before this video comes out or anybody sees it, where the army will step in and they'll say we're in charge, because there's a complete crisis of confidence in the government, and everybody else is distressed. demands of exile. We are growing a bitter seed issue of poets who can't go home again in this here jar of a mag. Here are squat men in fat suits, papillon, greasy, huddled in dark Chicago basements, perched on writing tables to leap to Paris into Biedermeier inkstands. Prettiness, of course, isn't the issue when one has left behind all the pretty things and is now at the mercy of scent, happenstance, emigration, digestion. Nor is the issue courage or top form, though both are necessary in order to play sweep over the borders of official forms that need be completed and punctuated. Not nostalgia, not horror, not righteousness, though in various degrees these are the alarm clock perched on the wobbly armoire, child of one eternity and an enraged grown-up who saw her bathing one day at the non-political shore of childhood and caused them to merge into a murderous infinity whose issue is fiery death and more death. For now they are kept apart by the writing hand. The pen prevents the closing of the fist, and prices being what they are, it's a good thing too. Not indignation, intelligence, rage, though in various bourgeois measure these two once mixed well to steer the hornet nest of culture, causing bees to rise from pamphlets into larger print. Home is a car on the road to a cottage filled with storytelling, myth-making rustics, leaning on a future composed of woven pelts, miles of sausages, milk, and approximate figures which form the anti-historical peak where one rests in the company of national fiction at its most formal ease under a sky of homespun ambiguities and goat. No, those are not the issues, though each line makes the jar buzz and sets the fashion free. The issue is ease and when. The bitterness thereof is the lack of it. The Sunday afternoon going to bad movies made by people one knows slightly, then letting the haze of a cigarette over Turkish coffee push the country forward, a miraculous machine that is the opposite of a cement truck. When I went back to Romania and saw my old friends from high school, then I definitely felt once more that I was a Jew, which I had quite forgotten in a certain way. My family came from the part of Transylvania that was ceded to Hungary during World War II. And all of my mother's sisters and my grandmother's family died in Auschwitz. My mother and one of her sisters managed to get into Romania where they were safe. And so Hungary, or the Hungarian part of Romania, to me, is a desolate place. That's where all that side of the family was gone. There's
the howling wilderness.
Complete emptiness. There is nothing there. When I got to the other side, I found a kind of pedestrian anti-Semitism. It was in everybody's banal way of getting along. A guy came to our table, and I was sitting with a friend in Sibiu, and he said, we exchanged a few words, and he said, oh, you sound just like the kikes who are coming back. So I looked at him and I said, and so who was your mother, Hitler's assistant or dentist? I don't know what I said. He was offended. He was offended. He was, because this is just a way of talking. It was friendly to say, you talk like the kikes who came back. So I chased him away, and for the rest of the time, my good friend kept exchanging soulful looks with his other friend who couldn't come to our table because I was going to tear his head off.
But all anti-Semites are like that. They're basically saying, fuck you if you can't take a joke. You know? It struck a lot of people as paradoxical that the State of Israel had such good relations with the Ceausescu regime, and that Rabbi Rosen was such a prominent figure of Bucharest society and was involved in the sale of Jews for exile, that he knew was swelling Ceausescu's coffers, and that he would also testify on the Hill, in case of need, that Romania was a good country and where most favored nation status could be conferred. Now, did any of that strike you as painful, that it could be an opposition between the dignity of the Jews of Romania and the exigencies, if you like, of the State of Israel, the realpolitik of Israel?
Well, to me, it was a tremendously lucky thing, because I was one of the Jews that Israel bought in, early on, when Ceausescu just started selling people to abroad, Germans to Germany and Jews to Israel. Israel paid $10,000 a head for me and my mother. So I owe the state of Israel 10,000 bucks. At some point I'll probably have to pay it back because I never went to Israel.
I think you're the first person I've met who's been bought.
Bought, yeah.
And sold. And yet retained autonomy.
Well, because once the deal was concluded and I got outside of Romania, there was no point in abiding by the terms, you know, to me, because I wasn't going to go to Israel. I certainly didn't feel any kind of loyalty to any Jewish idea because I was not a Jew in any kind of way. Except,
perhaps once redeemed would be the word, in fact.
That's...
One doesn't often get the chance to say that, so I thought I'd take it.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there could ever be an intelligent nostalgia for the communist order in Eastern Europe?
Well, hell, it's already going on. I've heard a lot of people say things were better under Ceausescu. There was law and order. If you threw a bottle at a policeman, you got arrested. I've heard people say in Sibiu that Nicu Ceausescu was a good guy, that we had food when he was around, things are worse. There's already, I mean, the place is haunted by nostalgia. It's probably the same in the Soviet Union.
A tyrannized people force you to ask, why do people ever get to love their chains? And which is what we've been discussing. But in your book On the Outside, you ask why are free people, the Americans, who've never known any chains, so much love to volunteer to be conformists?
Well, it may very well be that, you know, conformism transcends ideological systems, and that it is just a part of the human desire to get along and not make waves, you know. And when the kind of conformism that I talk about in the United States is qualitatively different than the kind of conformism that Romanians experienced there, because it was coerced, there was fear. I think there is probably a big difference between Stalin and Vanna White, although I tend to make somewhere say that Vanna White serves the same function, you know, to make you believe that the world makes sense. Because if you turn those letters over, underneath somewhere there are intelligible phrases, you know, never mind that they are cliches and that they are these things, these endless things, but the world makes sense. You can guess at them. And it's the same kind of feeling of security that Stalin gave us, because the iconography of communism, of that period of communism, was so comforting. It made sense of the world, and anything or anyone who struck out found themselves in a wilderness. And I think that any time that people experience the wilderness in a certain way, their part of their selves will resist it. This is a poem called Circle Jerk, which is being translated into Romanian, and I had a hell of a time explaining to my translator what actually that meant. As I've told her, I mean, I had to explain the literal and also tell her it was a kind of political term as well, you know. But so I seen, you know, these guys are sitting around, you know, in this circle jerk, you know, figuring out what is going to happen for the next 50 years. Circle jerk. Nel mezzo del camino, I found myself in the middle class, looking at two diverging options, ideology and addiction. My triumph is to practice both. Revirginate or perish. Learn how to read to trees. You never know who might be listening when the class enemy is in the class. Can he be that hombre who walk into town followed by a slow caravan of Toyota vans laden with empty mail sacks ready to buy everything? The shelves, the things on them, the stores themselves, the clerk's personal effects, and gives them whatever they ask for? When this hombre leaves, the town wobbles like a great plucked chicken and shivers from cheap wind. This hombre then sits in on a card game west of the Picos and tells this joke to the members of the cabinet. An old Jew asks the Soviet border guard for a globe to see where he should go. After hours of careful study, he returns it and asks, "Do you have another globe?" In the end, we remember not the joke, nor the out-of-place place where he tell it to the people, but the fact that we all detest living through the adroit manipulations of the small print clauses of our social contract. Therefore, you, in the front row, wouldn't you rather do it your way? Don Juan, narcissist whose job is to upset order and the authorities spent establishing it, releases energy teased into being by his hat. Once a man loses his taste for himself, he becomes completely unsavory. Meat spoils from within. Others seep in through the chinks and chomp their way through heart and gut. 2 careless lovers are worth 1,000 bankers. The world is froth over the surface of an untouched hard core that first looks real, then nostalgic, then Betamax. I stagger from barbecue to barbecue and never see sobriety anymore.